Evening, everyone. Just please say if you can't hear me, because the rain and everything, so just tell me to speak louder if I start wandering. As was outlined, I'm just going to give you an outline of what unconventional gas is, what we perceive to be the environmental risks, and what our environmental regulatory role is for this activity. I'm a senior policy development officer, basically, and why we are developing, why I say developing rather than just our policy, is because this activity, as we know, is new in Scotland and it covers many of our different regulatory regimes. So we want to make sure that all the different regimes are fit for purpose and make sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. So that's why it's a bit of policy development and coordination. But I think the important thing to note is that the industry is carrying out activities that many other industries carry out: the drilling of boreholes, the abstraction of water, the discharge of water. These are activities that are carried out by other industries. So we have got a lot of experience in working with these. Just in case everyone doesn't know who we are Scotland's leading environmental regulatory body with our aim to protect and improve the environment. We do this through regulation and monitoring and public engagement and working with industries to realise their responsibilities. We're also a non-departmental public body. The first things I want to do is just to explain what we mean by unconventional gas. And you'll notice I'm using the term unconventional gas rather than fracking, because fracking or fracturing or hydraulic fracturing is a technique that's often used in the process of extracting unconventional gas. So I just want to get that clear, because some unconventional gas extraction or exploration doesn't actually use the technique of fracking or hydraulic fracturing. So it's important to get that clear in our understanding. So if you'll see from this very sort of simple schematic, what it tries to explain is where the different conventional and unconventional sources are. So unconventional sources are much deeper. You can see lower down the rich shales, and also there's the coal bed methane at the top. So I don't have a lighter to show you, but these unconventional, why we talk about unconventional is because the gas is more embedded. It's more almost captured by the rock. So it needs different kinds of processes to separate it. Conventional tends to be further away from the original source and tends to be more loose, more free, and therefore you can almost drill and it comes out. While unconventional, you need to do different processes to try and release that gas from the rock formation, and it's much deeper. And again, I wanted to put this up first just so we all know where we are at the moment. As of the 28th of January, Fergus Ewing did put out a moratorium on unconventional gas extraction activities. That's including exploration and exploitation. What they want to do is further public consultation. They want to look at the health impacts, strengthening planning and environmental regulations. And so therefore they have given the Scottish planning authorities, the local authorities, and SEPA a direction to say that any application that we may get for unconventional gas activities, be it exploration or exploitation or production, we will have to send that to the Scottish Government for determination. And that's important to know. This moratorium will stand until the Scottish Government appear to have their evidence and will assess the situation. This is just in Scotland, and it's not just for the technique of fracking, just for clarity. Regulations and regulatory people. There's a lot of us involved in unconventional gas extraction, like with many other industries. I think the first thing to point out is the Department of Energy and Climate Change, which is the Westminster, is responsible for issuing the rights to these reserves because it's a reserved matter. So the energy is a reserved matter, therefore the right to these resources is reserved. So this is when I'll show you in a minute about what they do, issue these PEDL licenses. But nothing can happen on the ground without going through Scottish planning system or the Scottish environmental permitting regime. So I think that's really important to know. So although the rights are given up by DEC, the actual activities on the ground are regulated by ourselves here in Scotland. We are a statutory consultee to the planning system, There's also the Health and Safety Executive, who has a responsibility looking at the health and safety of the activities being carried out. The Coal Authority has responsibilities if it goes through a coal seam, which is most likely to. And then we have our role through our environmental permitting regime, which I'll explain today. Currently in Scotland, these are the PEDL licences. So these are the licences that have been issued by the Department of Energy and Climate Change to confer the rights to different companies. So we have, the most active one is PEDL 133 in the middle there, that is currently owned by Dart Energy, and also INEOS have just recently bought into a non-operating ownership of that. And this one is the one that's been going through planning to go to production stage. It's been exploring for several years. It's got various planning permissions and environmental permits, and it's going for production stage, and that's now with the Scottish Ministers to determine. They also have one in 163 and 161 in sort of the Fife area, but nothing particularly has been happening in this area, and it's quiet. They are concentrating on 133, and there's no activities in 160. In PEDL 162, a company called Reach Coal Seam have been exploring for here in this area, and INEOS, as we talk about Grangemouth, INEOS has bought into that licence as well as an operator, so we'll be pursuing exploration activities in there. There's one other PEDL licence in the Dumfries area, known as Canonby area, as you might have seen that. That's held by Dart Energy as well. I think it was back in, back in July, the Department of Energy and Climate Change issued a new round of licences, giving a new competition to operators to bid for new licence areas to give them the rights to those resources. So the blue areas are the areas that are up for bidding now, and we expect a result probably after the election, I would imagine, but anyone's not sure about that. And this will give, again, the operator the rights to these resources. But again, as I said, nothing can happen on the ground until they've got planning or environmental permits in place. So what I wanted to do by this schematic is to kind of summarise some of the activities. Again, it's a very simplistic diagram, but I wanted to illustrate some of the activities. So the first thing you've got is what is a well pad, is the construction of a well. This will be done at exploration stage, where they will drill a vertical well to 850, 200, 2,000 metres, depending on where the source is. They may need to go horizontally as well after that. That's the very first stage. They may need to abstract water, they may need to discharge water, and they also may need to treat that wastewater or treat the waste drilling fluids. So these are all activities that could be happening on the surface. And if you see on the far right, there's the refining activity. Once they've done exploration, probably for several years, and it proves valuable, they will then move to the more refining, the cleaning of the gas to make it fit for purpose for whether it's going to industry or going into the grid network. They will need to do some refining, and that's another activity that will come on. But these are all staged, and you will have several wells, which again I'll explain later. So we looked at experiences across America, Canada and Australia and other places to see what the environmental risks are. There's a number of studies as well we've looked at. And we've highlighted the key here on this diagram, the key environmental risks associated with the activities. So for example, borehole construction from the well. As it goes down vertically, it's crossing through different qualities of water. And we want to make sure those quality waters keep separated, and when they're not, the well is not creating a pathway. So for example, the more saline, deeper water is not rising up through this pathway and contaminating potential drinking waters. So there's potential pollutants arising from that, and that's water coming into the well, but also pollutants, gas and drilling muds or fracturing fluid leaving the wells and contaminating the water bodies. Also, once they go vertically, they sometimes, more often, will be going horizontally to enter the coal seams. Again, we want to make sure that those horizontal ones are not causing fractures and causing contamination between different water bodies. There's also associated water pollution from surface activities, which is similar to other industries. And there's also potential for air pollution arising from fugitive emissions or intended emissions from flares, which we will also identify as a potential environmental risk. So, one of the key regimes that we have is known as the Water Environment Controlled Activities Regulations 2011. We know them as CAR, so I'll refer them to CAR from now on. And what I've tried to do in this diagram is highlight the activities that the CAR regime will regulate, with the primary aim of protecting the water bodies, particularly the groundwater, surface water, these bodies from potential pollution risk. So, for example, when a well is being proposed, they will need to gain an appropriate CAR authorisation to construct that well. As of 2013, in April 2013, we escalated that. We perceived that to be a greater risk the deeper you go, because you're connecting more water bodies, therefore a greater risk, potential risk. So therefore they need to go for what's known as a complex licence. So it's a tighter regime than previously. And again, our main aim is to ensure there's appropriate monitoring in place, there's appropriate construction of the well, appropriate integrity of that well, and appropriate ongoing monitoring as well. We also have a role for some of the unconventional gas like coal bed methane, they draw out the water, they abstract the water rather than inject the water. And so again, that is controlled through our CAR regime, as is if they were injecting fracturing fluids to break up the rocks underneath and release the gas, that activity would be controlled as well. So that's the injection of the water, the abstraction of the water, and then when that water comes to the surface or polluted comes to the surface, that also needs to be treated before it could be discharged, and that's another regulated activity. The treatment facilities are also further regulated by CAR. And so our CAR regime is our primary tool, and each and every well will need to go through this appropriate CAR authorisation. These two diagrams I wanted to show, you'll see on the left you've got the Forth Rail Bridge, and if you sort of put that down, you'll see the kind of depths we're going to. We're going right down to 2.5 kilometres of the potential sources. So it's not like your drinking water boreholes are about 100 metres, very shallow. These are going considerable depth. So you've got to consider that element when you're considering the risks. The things that we'll be looking at is what's on the right-hand side is how that well is constructed. What we wouldn't want to see is just one steel piping and maybe just one cement casing, because if that fails, there is a potential for contamination. So we would be seeking the operator to construct a well that will withstand the different environmental pressures that are underground, the different depths you're going to, and consider the water bodies you're going through, so therefore that they cannot have water ingressing or egressing out of the well between the casings. This is just an illustration basically to show you what it may look like on the surface once the drilling has happened and the gas is just being produced. These are the kind of what they call Christmas trees that will be on the surface. So I was just giving you a bit of a visual picture. And you'll see on the left-hand one, what's happening here is not just one well. So you've got a well pad about 1 acre and you'll have numerous well heads on that rather than have lots of well heads dotted all over. The operators will tend to build up more and more on one well pad, reduces planning and environmental concerns. As I said, some of unconventional gas extraction requires the technique of fracturing to be employed to actually release that gas. So therefore, what they'll do is they'll inject water with other elements to fracture the source. So they'll inject about 94% water and about 5% sand, and the remaining will be fracking fluids, which are proponents that I'm sure Andrew will go into more detail later on. But they are things that you would find in your household, but you wouldn't want to drink. So we would be asking the operator, what are you putting in there? What are you injecting? We need to know what there is part of their fracturing fluid to be able to know what the risks are. So they can't close that, they can't not give us that information. Part of their our risk assessment is to know that information. Don't expect you to particularly see the arrows and stuff like that, but what I wanted to illustrate here is monitoring is absolutely essential in this process, and we particularly for the importance of baseline monitoring, and we will be requiring operators to carry out baseline monitoring. The monitoring requirements will depend on the activity, the risks of the activity, and it will be based on the source pathway receptor model. So where are the potential sources of pollution? What are the potential pathways like the well? What is the potential receptors like the drinking water? So they have to identify that. They have to do risk assessments based on that and produce a monitoring plan. That monitoring plan has to be approved by us before they can do any activity, and it will include baseline, ongoing monitoring and closing monitoring. Just to say that we are expecting to produce our groundwater monitoring guidance for this activity in the next few months, which should be useful. This diagram is to show another regulatory regime, which is actually not in our control, but is relevant, is the Management of Extractive Waste Regulation, responsibility for the local authority planning department. So any activity that's extracting hydrocarbons falls within this, this regime. And why we need to know as well is because, in England, the Environment Agency have responsibility for this, so it's important to clarify that it's not our responsibility here, it's the local authorities. Just so people know to go to the right people. But also, if it doesn't fall in the Management of Extractive Waste Regulations, it falls within our waste management licensing regime. So we are a statutory consultee in the process of that, so we know if it's not being included in extractive waste, we have the controls in place under our waste management licensing regime. So this includes air waste as well, so fugitive emissions, solid waste such as drill cuttings, wastewater. These are all part of the management of extractive waste. And in short, as part of your planning application, you would have to produce a waste management plan that sets out how you would be preventing and managing these waste streams as part of the planning process. The activity is most likely due to the depth to cause naturally occurring radioactive substances, what known as norm. We will assume that the activity will be generating this, and the operator will have to demonstrate if it's not creating norm. And this is more likely from the depths they go to, and then the process of dewatering, the pulling out of the water, or the fracturing process is likely to do that. So therefore they will need the appropriate authorisation to manage that water or drilling muds that come to the surface that may contain what's known as norm, naturally occurring radioactive substances. Once they've been exploring for some years and they now move to the production stage, when I was talking about they need to do some more cleaning of the gas varies in quality, and if it needs refining, it may need to be a PPC activity, which is known as pollution prevention control activity. And this is a regime that looks at air, land and water pollution. It's a more holistic regime than just say CAR, which focuses on water. But it's important to note that this activity is for a named activity, such as refining. So at the moment, it doesn't cover the whole site, so a whole site wouldn't need a PPC activity. That would still have the other regimes in place. And it will and there could be situations potentially where they may not need a PPC activity, especially at exploration stage, because they won't be actually using that gas. So these are the activities, the regulations that we have, the regulatory controls that we have in place. I'm not going to go through them again, but just to summarise them there. And this one I wanted to say, on the left-hand side are the potential impacts, and such as from flaring and fugitive emissions. And just to point out, there's other regulators involved in regulating this as well as ourselves. So, for example, flaring, the Department of Energy and Climate Change have a role. Fugitive emissions through the local air quality and local planning. HSC, again, indirectly, the HSC because they control borehole construction. And climate change, all public bodies have responsibilities where they regulate them. And seismicity, so potential earthquake risks, a responsibility of local authority and Department of Energy and Climate Change. The right-hand side picture, most people have seen, and it's basically a landscape of lots of dots and lots of roads. This is in America, where the rights are just, free-for-all, basically. In Britain, we have a licensing regime known as, I talk about the PEDL, so we have a more structured to strategic approach to abstraction, so you're not likely to see that seen, because each one of those pads would need planning permission, and that wouldn't likely to be go through due to cumulative impacts. And so what we're more likely to see is on the left-hand side, where the operator has, say, 4 or 5 pads, and they drill multiple wells from that pad underground. And you'll have heard more recently in debate about access rights, and then it went through the infrastructure bill in Westminster. Important to note that that does not apply in Scotland, so you would still need access agreements from landowners here in Scotland, although that's not the case now south of the border. Just wanted to summarise that the local authorities have responsibilities under their management of extracted waste, environmental and planning impact assessments, local air quality. And last year, the Scottish Government updated their Scottish planning policy. So applicants need to undertake a risk assessment for all proposals for shale gas. They do need to consult their local authorities. And based on this information, they could, if they felt it was appropriate, introduce what's known as buffer zones. There's no set limit set on it, that's up for the local authority to decide that. But what's also important to consider in the planning policy is proposed that what the operator says at the beginning, obviously they have to carry on doing. So if the operator is saying they're not going to fracture or do a hydraulic fracking or fracking, then if they suddenly decide that they need to do the activity, they need to go through the planning process again. That's known as a significant change, and therefore they do need to redo a planning. And that's important, so you can't slip it in through the side door, so to speak. Also, the planning authority needs to consider the sequence. So what's the best sequence of extraction of unconventional gas? So don't flare off the gas if someone could potentially use that. Scottish Government also set up an independent scientific panel of leading academics to look at the current industry and the potential impacts in Scotland. They have submitted their findings to the Minister, and the Minister is assessing those views, and this will probably be part of this moratorium, assessing the views, the evidence to go forward. As we said, we are one of the regulators, and we have quite a lot of roles to play, and therefore we have developed our website to lots of frequently asked questions and summaries. But back in 2012, we also produced our guidance, which summarised what's happening and what our role is, which we will update as time goes on and as the industry develops. We work with the Department of Energy and Climate Change and also with Europe, because a lot of activities and all the directives and our regulations come from Europe. So we will be continuing to work with them to make sure that we've got the best evidence to build up and make sure that our regulatory regime is fit for purpose. If we do identify any gaps or overlaps, we'll be working with Scottish Government, as we have done so far, on making sure that those gaps are plugged. Thank you for having me, and I am more than happy for my contact details to be shared and anyone to contact me. And on the question and answer session, I just want to say I'm happy to answer any questions I can, but please bear in mind this industry involves a lot of experts and people in SEPA, from hydrology to geology, and if I can't answer a question because it's not within my specific area, I'm more than happy to take the question back and get back to you, but I'll endeavour to answer as many as possible. Thank you.